So today, we're talking about witness consciousness. And in speaking last week about civility, it just seemed important that maybe we continue this talk about looking at the bigger picture, but this time with ourselves. I felt it might be good for us to look at understanding two key things. First, what does it mean to be the observer of our thoughts? And second, how can we actually use that awareness to empower ourselves? So I'd like to begin with a story about Eckhart Tolle that I think will set the stage for today's message. Now, many of you know him. He's world famous for books like The Power of Now. But what not everybody knows is that he was suffering for years with severe depression. He contemplated suicide for years, and he struggled quite a bit. He was 29 years old when he woke up during the night with the same thing he often wakes up with, the thought that he can't go on. Only this time something was different. He woke up feeling this unbearable depression and fear, and he said, and he thought, I can't live with myself any longer. In that moment, for the first time ever, in all the years he struggled, he realized, who is the I that I can't live with? I can't live with myself. Who is the I and who is myself? Who's doing the talking? And so he was caught off guard by that. Wait, it's not just me? So he goes back to sleep, and he wakes up realizing there are two beings. And he said he felt this incredible peace. He wrote this, I felt drawn into a void. I didn't know at the time that what really happened was the mind-made self, with its heaviness, its problems, that lives between the unsatisfying past and the fearful future, simply collapsed. It dissolved. The next morning I woke up and everything was so peaceful. The peace was there because there was no sense of self, just a sense of presence and beingness, just observing, just watching. I went online yesterday to watch an interview he did to better understand what he was feeling in that moment. And in the interview, he described what happened that night as a spiritual suicide, where he felt his ego had died instead of him having to jump off a bridge. It's pretty powerful for a guy who's world famous for teaching us about the presence of now, the power of now. From that moment on, he learned to be the observer of his thoughts and experienced, since then, freedom from his mind, from the man-made mind. Now, in Eastern philosophy, this observer person it's known as witness consciousness. You are witnessing through your consciousness the act of the ego self. Witness consciousness. But in unity, we often say it's the I am, or our higher self. So there's the higher self, and then there's the ego self. And the ego self is the one that goes, I'm not going to do that. I don't like the way they just acted. Well, I didn't appreciate that. Well, I'm not happy. This one did that to me. That one did this. Or, oh, I'm so happy I have everything in life until I don't. That one that goes up and down, and kind of plays with our mind all the time. But our higher consciousness is that gift we were born with, that spirit within us, that peace that always knows it's going to be okay, even when our mind says, how can it be? Look at my circumstances. But it's in that space where we're in that spirit self, that higher consciousness, that is when our thoughts, our emotions, and even what our body is experiencing, become so aware of. We're so mindful in those moments that this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm going through. Wow, why am I going through that? Instead of, it feels so bad. We actually step up and elevate our consciousness to a place of watching ourselves act and behave a certain way. Deepak Chopra says, you, my friend, are not your thoughts. You are the thinker of your thoughts. Now, the way I understand this best is to see it like an internal silent partner. You're going through life, each of us is going through life with this internal silent partner. And the partner is always there. And we're getting guidance, but we don't know where it's coming from. That's the part of us that I believe is connected to this amazing universe and God's energy and strength. Awakening that part of us is critical if we ever want to grow spiritually. If we want to grow spiritually and we don't develop a higher level of thinking, we are stuck. You cannot grow spiritually and stay stuck in what your ego mind tells you is happening. It doesn't work that way. Now, this is amazing, and I want you to, if you hear nothing else from me today, I hope it's this. The goal is for us to learn to express ourselves from our highest self and become more aware of our thoughts, because 80+% of our thoughts are repeated day after day after day, which means only 20% of those thoughts are new, at best. Now think that through for a minute. If we're having thoughts about our limitations or our inability, what is the likelihood of anything in our life changing if 80 to 90% of our thoughts are the same every day? There's no magic in this. You have to change your thinking if you expect your life to change. It's that simple, but it's not that easy, as we all know. Eckhart Tolle puts it in perspective this way. He says, when you identify with the mind, whatever's going on in your ego mind, your man-made mind, you're giving it more energy. Well, that's great if what you're putting out there is good. But it's not so great if what you're putting out isn't good. So if you continue to talk about your limitations and your inabilities, then all you're doing is giving it more energy. But observing the mind and not getting engaged in it actually dissipates the energy. So whatever you're thinking, if you just become the observer and go, oh, that's a terrible thought, why did I think that? And you can actually let it go. And it will dissolve. But if you stay with it and you keep feeding it, it's building momentum. In other words, if we're fearful or stuck in our emotions and start believing that what we're experiencing is as overwhelming as it feels, we are simply fueling that thought to continue forward. But from a place of witness consciousness, we can diffuse all of that negativity and allow ourselves to stay empowered. Now, I was curious as to why our minds have this tendency to repeat the same thoughts each day. So I went on a hunt to try and find this answer, and here's what I came up with. Author, interfaith minister, and psychotherapist Nancy Collier said that our minds try to reject present moment. Why is the next question, right? Why do we do that? And she explains it this way. Thoughts are a way the mind tries to manage its fear of and lack of trust in the present moment. Rather than risk diving into the moment now, into the river of life, we stay on the shore, using our mind to manage, control, and make linear sense of our present experience, in hopes of steering the present moment in a direction that we have orchestrated. How many of us know that to be true? Yes? Yes. We definitely all have had this experience. Whatever's happening now, I can't just dive in. This is bad. This is going to be bad. So I'm going to control it. I'm going to control the narrative around it. I'm going to control it. That robs us of the power of now. What if in this moment this were to change our life forever? Now, the way I like to see this is that clearly our mind has its own way of protecting us, which is good, but not so good. But if we're going to be empowered by witness consciousness, we need to be the owners of those negative thoughts. We need to take responsibility every day for the thoughts that we continue to repeat that are not helping us grow spiritually. If I asked you to think of 5 things that you told yourself yesterday that didn't do one thing for your spiritual growth, I'd be willing to bet we'd all write them down. And it would be easy. But if I asked you to think of 5 things you did or said for yourself to yourself that were for your spiritual growth, I think it would become difficult. Some of us might say, well, I can think of one. When I said I was feeling good today, but the rest of the time, what is going on in the head? A bunch of negative, naysaying stuff that does not help us. If our thoughts are causing fear or doubt, we have to own them. We cannot keep blaming our ego. We can't separate from it and say, well, it wasn't me, it was the other me. We'll just stay stuck and we'll keep repeating the same mistakes of doubting and disbelief and lack of faith that there is something bigger and better in this lifetime than what's happening in front of us. We cannot grow if we stay stuck and become the obstacle. And the more understanding and compassion we develop for ourselves in terms of why we think the way we do, why we act and feel the way we do, the more likely we are to choose a different thought, a different feeling, and a different action. Anything different than our tired old behaviors. Think of it like this: with greater empowerment, greater changes occur. And the more likely we are to bring that 80% of repetitive thinking down and start making room for new thoughts. I thought about this yesterday. I'm probably thinking way too deeply. I get carried away on this stuff. But I thought about how we sometimes remember what we were like 20 years ago and 10 years ago and 5 years ago. And oh, by the way, 5 minutes ago. Now, did you ever notice how often do we think of ourselves as being different in all those scenes? We can remember the scene was different in our life. What was going on in our life might have been different. But how often are we seeing ourselves differently? I don't think I realized that until Thursday night when I was meeting with students at the university and saying that whatever you're experiencing now, do you think that's where you're going to be 5 days from now? And I'm certain they believe they are. And we remember being that, right? Oh, yeah, because we still are. We're still in that place of rethinking, regurgitating, repeating. And we've got to change that. In researching more on this topic, I wondered if there were risks associated with getting to the place of higher consciousness so much that we start not feeling numb to life. And don't you know, I find this message. It was a message written to Deepak Chopra, and it was a woman who said that she was starting to feel that she was detaching, getting to a higher consciousness and detaching so much that she wasn't connecting anymore with people's problems. She was just listening and finding herself observing, including her own problems. And she said she just kind of felt, geez, I don't know if this is good. And here's what he wrote her back. He said, the awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and I'm summarizing, by the way, the awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and experiences without getting emotionally involved or attached is a sign of spiritual awakening. He said it shows us that we're developing our true self as independent from our ego self and the limiting qualities of our mind, body, and our senses. The more our silent witness emerges, the more genuinely compassionate, giving, and intuitive we become. And as that happens, we can feel other people's emotions, offer help or support without ever losing our strength and centeredness. Now, Charles Fillmore talks about this too. And he said that situations like Eckhart Tolle found himself is the realization of the Christ consciousness. That in that moment, that is what he experienced. He said it's our ability to realize there's another world out there, and that is the inner world, which is the kingdom of the heavens within, and he often referred to it that way. He taught us that we had to believe in the power of that inner world enough to know that doing so would raise us to the highest level of expression. However, he also explained that as this realization occurs, it will disturb all of our old patterns. We'll feel it, we'll notice it, and we'll feel uncomfortable with it. Charles believed we are the power of God in action and that each of us has the highest power of the universe within us. But he also understood that people are often afraid of rising to that highest level of consciousness because doing so eliminates what some people might perceive as common sense about the obvious. Here's how he explains it. I think you'll appreciate it. He says, be careful of that old boy common sense. He'll get you into more trouble than any other thing in the universe, what we call common sense. Common sense is a good thing, I presume, but I'd rather have spiritual ideas. I'd rather have one spiritual idea rather than all the common sense I ever had, because common sense always got me into trouble. And I never was gotten into trouble with a real spiritual idea. I love what he says here, Because if we look back at what Eckhart Tolle went through, we realize how long he had rationalized his depression. Years of suffering by allowing his thoughts to control him. And he saw himself as limited by that mind and the physical conditions he felt. But in one night only of questioning himself, his entire life changed. Now, some of us may experience this agonizing process on a daily basis, repeating our thoughts on a topic or an issue to the point of becoming paralyzed by them. And then suddenly, in a moment of clarity, when we can observe ourselves in that agony, we come to the realization that we have become the obstacle in our own way. And that's when we'll finally make changes and be empowered. Let's review today's lessons. Being empowered by witness consciousness occurs when we first learn that we are not our thoughts. We are the observer of those thoughts. Number 2, allow ideas to be divinely guided. Such ideas are without attachments. 3, understand the I versus the self, our spiritual heart versus our ego. And 4, live with heightened awareness without our ego and its dramas. Our affirmation today is, I am witnessing my highest good. Let's say that together. I am witnessing my highest good. And from Deepak Chopra, awakening is not changing who you are, but discarding who you are not. Let's take that in. And so we pause for a moment to reflect upon the gift of spirit within that leads us to the highest consciousness. And recognizing that in any given moment, everything can change and we can be empowered. Amen.